Hello and welcome to Steve's Vintage Model Builds. Had an interesting intro there for an interesting subject, something pretty unique and certainly unique to my channel, and something we don't see very often. I apologize for the glare. That'll be gone as soon as I take the plastic off here. And so today we've got a special kit review of the Atlantis, Monitor, and Merrimack Civil War Battle of the Ironclads. And this commemorates, actually this was a Lindbergh kit from 1962 that was released to, I don't know if you can say celebrate, but commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Hampton Roads, which was the first engagement between two ironclad warships. And so to be honest with you, there's not a lot to the kit. So we're gonna go through that, but we're also gonna have history. Yay, history! Okay, so yeah, plenty of history here, and for many of our British fellow hobbyists, they might not be that. I'm sure they've heard of it, but might not be that aware of the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War. Obviously, it was a traumatic and tumultuous time in United States history, and in any case, I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to talk about stuff. Okay, I'm going to move this down. There we go. And here's a contemporary map of the area. Up here is the Chesapeake Bay, which opens out onto the Atlantic Ocean. And here is the James River, the Nansemond River, and the Elizabeth River. And the confluence between these rivers and the Chesapeake Bay was called Hampton Roads. So, yeah, before we continue on to the actual battle, hey, visual aids today, hey guys? Hey, how do you like that? Sorry about the focus, that's just it. That's the way it is. Can't do nothing about it. There we go. So the first quote-unquote ironclad ship was a French ship, La Gloire, Gloire, Gloire. It's French, not my native language. And that was the first ocean-going ironclad warship. And that was in 1860. And in 1861, Great Britain, coincidentally, the year that the U.S. Civil War started, Great Britain followed with the HMS Warrior, which, again, my British friends I'm sure will be familiar with. And Warrior was the first armor-plated, iron-hulled warship. And you know, navies are pretty conservative as a rule, and they're slow to change. So the use of armor and armor plate remained controversial, and the United States Navy really didn't want to have anything to do with it. So, those were the first two, ironclad ships. But following shortly after, I'm going to go into a little bit of history here again. When the Confederate States declared war, started the war, whatever, at Fort Sumter in 1861, immediately the Union Navy blockaded Hampton Roads and Chesapeake Bay. In effect, they had locked in the Confederates. They couldn't get anything in. They couldn't get anything out. Now, in the meantime, as part of at the beginning of the war, the Confederates attacked the naval base in the area, and as often happened, especially earlier in the war, the Union Federal forces were caught with their pants down. Their commanders were befuddled, didn't know what to do, and were paralyzed with inaction. As a result, the Confederates took Norfolk and its huge naval base and supplies and so on and so forth. So so that was another big reason that the Union blockaded Chesapeake Bay. Now, as part of that, when the Confederates, as part of that battle, there was a ship, a steamship, a wooden ship, but with steam engines, called the USS Merrimack. And the Merrimack is a river in Massachusetts. It's a long, winding river. It runs down through, all around, If you ever drive down that way, you're pretty likely to have to cross it more than once. It was a big joke in my family on one of our motor trips. I think on one day we crossed it 7 times. It's a windy, snaky river. So, anyways, so it was a joke in our family. So, anyways, it was, oh, there's the Merrimack River again. Oh my goodness. Are we completely lost, Dad? Anyways, we weren't. That's just the way it was. So, the Merrimack was attacked and burnt down to the hull line. So all the superstructure was burned, but the engines were repairable, and the main hull, which was made of wood, was also sound. And so when the war did break out in 1861, the Confederate Secretary of the Navy, Stephen R. Mallory, was an early enthusiast, unlike the other Navy types, of the advantages of armor. The Confederate States were up against the United States of America with all of its industrial might and most of the population. So the deck was kind of stacked against them from the beginning. So they had to think innovatively, and so the way Mallory saw it was the Confederacy couldn't match the industrial might of the North either in building or sending out ships to sea, and so they'd have to build vessels that could just outclass them. In other words, one would be worth 3 or 4 or whatever the case may be. And he fully believed that armor would provide that edge. And so he put together a team. And they looked all over the South for factories that could build engines to drive the heavy ships, but they couldn't find anything right away. The best facility was the Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond, Virginia. But building engines from scratch would take at least a year. So initially, Williamson, one of the leads on the team, suggested taking the engines from the hulk of the Merrimack, which had recently been raised from the bed of the river. And the rest of the team eagerly accepted the idea, and they expanded on it, proposing that the design of their proposed ironclad be adapted to this hull. And so they produced revised plans and submitted them to Mallory for approval. And in July of 1861, the new design was accepted and the work began almost immediately. They towed the burned out hull into the graving dock that the Union Navy had failed to destroy again. Excuse me. Again, they left behind a bunch of stuff, just like they did in Afghanistan. In any case, in addition to the existing hull, they decided to incorporate an iron ram fitted to the prow. And technically, the idea was that the ship would be a ram, a big, heavy ram. And in addition to the ram, though, because of the size of the ship, it was a good-sized ship. They added 10 guns, 6 9-inch smoothbore, and 2 6.4 and 2 7-inch Brook rifles. Those would be like recoilless rifles. And trials showed that these rifles firing solid shot would pierce up to 8 inches of armor plating. The same Tredegar Ironworks could produce both the solid shot and the shells. And since it was believed the Virginia would only face, and in the meantime, back up a little bit, Steve, even though it's always been considered bad luck to change a ship's name, I guess they figured because the superstructure and it had been sunk and everything, they renamed it the CSS, that's Confederate States ship, Virginia. So that's why you'll see it sometimes called the Merrimack, sometimes it's called the Virginia. In the South, they'll call it the Virginia. In the North, they call it the Merrimack. Just like they called the Battle of Manassas in the South, they called it the Battle of Bull Run in the North. So everybody had a different term for everything. So that's the way it is. Okay, and so in any case, so they pierced the armor for 14 gun ports, 4 on each broadside, 3 forward and 3 aft. And along with the usual problems, transportation, rail networks and so forth in the South. It wasn't launched until February 3rd, 1862, and not commissioned until February 17th, when it finally did bear the permanent name CSS Virginia. In the meantime, the Union, the Federal Union, had received intelligence that the Confederates were working to develop an ironclad warship, and this made them pretty nervous because they knew, they realized, well, we got a lot of wooden ships, but if they send an ironclad, we're done. So they sought funding from Congress, and they got it on August 3rd, 1861. A commission was appointed, which was known as the Ironclad Board. It was 3 senior naval officers, and they were tasked with choosing among the designs that were submitted for consideration. The board considered 17 designs and chose to support 3. The first of the 3 to be completed, even though she was by far the most radical in design, was Swedish engineer and inventor John Ericsson's USS Monitor. And here, the Monitor is the smaller ship with the lower profile. If you can even call it a ship. Okay, the Monitor, it was built on New York's East River in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And it was, again, it was a very radical, striking design. She was completely made of iron, iron hull, armored hull, and armaments. And instead of a large number of guns, of a rather small bore, he opted for only 2 guns of large caliber. He wanted to use 15-inch guns, but had to settle for 11-inch Dahlgren guns when the larger size were unavailable. I guess they were being used for other things or just weren't available. He mounted each of these. He mounted them in a cylindrical turret, which was 20 feet by 9 feet, and was covered in 8 inches of iron. It rotated on a central spindle and was moved by a steam engine, a donkey engine that can be controlled by one man. And the normal charge would have been 30 pounds, but he was worried that that would be too much, but he wanted the bigger guns. I don't get that, but anyways. So he asked for a charge of 15 pounds to be used to lessen explosion chances of the turret. And it was found, as with the Virginia, that a full charge would pierce armor plate, and they believed that it could affect the outcome of a battle. There was a big flaw with the design in the ship, in that the pilot house from which the ship would be conned was a small structure forward of the turret on the main deck. And this meant its guns could not fire directly forward. And it was isolated from other activities on the ship. But in any case, despite the late start and the new construction, it was actually completed a few days before the Virginia. But the Virginia was activated first. Okay, so now we're going to get into the actual battle. And in the early morning of March the 8th, 1862, I'm gonna ditch this one for one that's a little more visually pleasing. And I'm gonna push this back. Excuse me while I kiss the sky. There we go. Alright, so here we go. Okay, so here's the Elizabeth River, and they steamed up from Norfolk, Portsmouth, steamed up the Elizabeth River, and along with some others. And at about 11:30 a.m., they entered Hampton Roads, approximately here. And they steamed up here, came down here, and absolutely ravaged the Union naval ships that were there. She was accompanied by the Raleigh and the Beaufort, and was later joined by the James River Squadron, Patrick Henry, Jamestown, and Teaser. The Union had 5 warships in the roadstead, in addition to several support vessels. The sloop of war Cumberland and the frigate Congress were the largest, and then they had a sail frigate St. Lawrence, and the steam frigates Roanoke and Minnesota, which were near Fort Monroe, along with the store shop Brandywine. Now, Fort Monroe is up here somewhere. I do believe. Oh no, Fort Monroe is up here. Yeah. Okay, and they went right for it. Virginia headed directly for the Union squadron, and the Union tug Zouave fired on the advancing enemy, and the Beaufort replied. Nothing happened, which is kind of the way it all turned out eventually. But anyways, Virginia didn't open fire until she was within easy range of the Cumberland. And she just, as I say, she just plastered the Cumberland and Congress. Return fire from those two ships just bounced off her iron plates without penetrating. And although later on some of the Cumberland's gunfire lightly damaged Virginia. Used as was intended, the Virginia rammed the Cumberland below the waterline, and she sank rapidly, gallantly fighting her guns as long as they were above water, according to the Virginia's Captain Buchanan. 121 seamen went down with her, and those wounded brought the total casualties to nearly 150. Now, ramming the Cumberland below the waterline almost resulted in the sinking of the Virginia as well. The ram got stuck in the Cumberland's hull and almost got dragged down with her. So, anyways, she managed to break free, but her ram broke off as she broke away. So, yeah, better to lose a hand than lose your life. Yeah, so, yeah. So then he turned, Buchanan then turned around the Virginia towards the Congress. And seeing what had happened to the Cumberland, he ordered his ship to ground in the shallow water. There you go. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead into the ground. Okay, so in any case, by that time the James River Squadron had arrived, joined the Virginia in the attack on the Congress, and basically they beat the Congress into submission, and she surrendered. And while they were taking survivors and prisoners off of the Congress, a Union battery on the North Shore opened fire on the Virginia. And so Buchanan ordered the Congress to be fired upon with hot shot, cannonballs that were heated red hot, and consequently she caught fire and burned through the rest of the day and into the night. And near midnight, the flames finally reached her magazine, and she exploded and sank stern first. An inglorious end to an inglorious engagement for the Cumberland. Or the Congress, I should say. Well, and the Cumberland. 110 were lost or missing and presumed drowned. Another 26 were wounded, of whom 10 died within days. And although basically successful, the Virginia was not completely unscathed. Aside from losing her ram, shot from the Cumberland and Congress and Union troops ashore had riddled her smokestack, reducing her already low speed. 2 of her guns were disabled, several armor plates had been loosened, 2 of the crew were killed and more were wounded. One of the wounded was Captain Buchanan, who stood out in the open out on the open top of the Virginia, thinking it was perfectly safe, which led to him having his left thigh pierced by a rifle shot. Which I guess at that point he learned that it was not safe to do that. And so the James River Squadron then turned its attention to the Minnesota, which had left Fort Monroe to join the battle. And the Virginia then went and joined the James River Squadron. However, she couldn't get close enough to be effective because it was low tide, and she had a very deep draft. She was a very large ship with a deep draft, very large, very heavy. And it was getting dark, so they couldn't see to aim anyways. So the attack was suspended, And the Virginia left, expecting to return the next day to finish things off. And so she retreated to the safety of the Confederate control waters off Sewell's Point for the night, which is here. But in total had lost, 250, but 250 enemy sailors have been killed, with only 2 losses on their side. And in addition, the Union had lost the 2 ships, and 3 again had been run aground. So, and so this part of the battle was definitely considered a major defeat, and it was an embarrassing defeat, one of many that the Confederacy would hand the Union, until finally President Lincoln banged some heads together and did whatever he needed to do to get the job done. You know, both sides, you know, both sides needed a rest. And, you know, overnight, they did temporary repairs, and Captain Buchanan was unable to continue. Command for the second day fell to his second officer, Lieutenant Catesby Ap Roger Jones. Now, that's an interesting name, and I am not going to comment on that interesting name. I'm sure it has a lot of history to it, and a lot of marriages between powerful families. Anyways. Now, Jones was just as aggressive as Buchanan, and he was, you know, he was all hell-bent to get her ready to go. But in the meantime, the Monitor, the USS Monitor, commanded by Lieutenant John L. Worden, arrived in Hampton Roads. It had been rushed to Hampton Roads in hopes of protecting the Union fleet and preventing Virginia from threatening Union cities. Captain Worden was informed his primary task was to protect Minnesota, so Monitor took up a position near the grounded Minnesota and waited. Why you want to protect a grounded ship, I don't know, but in any case. It made the people on the Minnesota feel good, I guess. Whatever. Anyways. So, next morning, March 9th, 1862, Virginia was ready to go again, and left the anchorage at Sewell's Point and moved in to attack the Minnesota, still aground, even though it was high tide. And she was also accompanied by 3 ships of the James River Squadron. They found their course blocked, however, by the newly arrived Monitor. And at first, Jones believed the strange craft, which one Confederate soldier mocked as a cheese on a raft, to be a boiler being towed from the Minnesota. Didn't realize what it was at all. And it soon became pretty obvious they were going to have to fight her. And so Virginia got the first shot off, fired at Monitor, and it flew right over her and hit Minnesota, which answered with a broadside. And this began what would be a lengthy engagement. And to quote Captain Jacques Van Brunt of the Minnesota, again, all hands were called to quarters, and when she approached within a mile of us, I opened upon her with my stern guns and made a signal to the Monitor to attack the enemy. Yes, yes. I fired from my butt after I'd grounded my ship and ordered them to go get them. All right, and so